Okay, here we
And welcome to another edition of the Double A Show on the Barroom Network. My name is Ken Fang, along with Stephen Negishi. If you were with us a couple of weeks ago, you may remember that I wasn't here for the beginning of the show. That was due to a shooting that affected me personally. Stephen, it's great to see you. Thank you for handling things solo a couple of weeks ago. And we're happy to be back together once again. And unfortunately, under some sad circumstances, once again, we've had multiple shootings. And of course, the one in Uvalde has affected us the most. 19 children, 2 teachers have been shot, 5 children still injured. And of course, continuing on, there have been 11 mass shootings this Memorial Day weekend and counting. And Stephen, as I mentioned to you at the end of last show, as I joined you at the end of our last show, you really don't know how a shooting will affect you until it happens. And let me just say that our hearts go out to everyone affected by the shootings over the last couple of weeks in Buffalo, in Laguna Woods, in Uvalde, and anywhere that there's been a mass shooting. There was also one in Tennessee over the last couple of days. It's just mind-boggling that these things are still happening in a country of ours, and well, other countries seem to have been able to take care of mass shootings like Australia and New Zealand. The United States is still still not able to do something about really what is an epidemic in this country.
Yes, indeed, Ken. I'm really at a loss these days now, and we didn't even mention about the shooting at a hair salon in Dallas that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, which involved a Korean hair salon, which
Yes.
Dallas Police Department initially said this is not a hate crime, but then eventually they had to do a 180 a few days later. And I'm kind of under the assumption that any shooting of this magnitude involving our community will automatically assume it's a hate crime targeted or targeted our community, especially in days like this. And having lived in Texas, it's a pretty kind of, I don't want to say wild west, no pun intended, because obviously, Texas used to be in that way a long time ago. But it's a scary situation. You've dealt it yourself. Obviously, what happened to your family members, and obviously you dealt with it, and you obviously have words that you can share with us about the feelings and the emotions that goes through you inside when your family members happened, when they happen to become a victim. Thankfully, obviously your family members are okay, but I can feel it even knowing what happened to you, and during the show last time it obviously made me emotional
Yes.
thinking about it. And there has to be a way, there has to be a solution now, so that people can live what they're supposed to do and what they're entitled to do, live the
Yes.
way they want to live.
Yes. I mean, you should feel safe going to the grocery store. You should feel safe going to church. You should feel safe going to the hair salon. You should feel safe going out and about doing your everyday life. You shouldn't have to live in fear of someone coming in and shooting up a supermarket, shooting up a church, shooting up a hair salon, shooting up a bar, shooting up any place that a mall.
Yeah.
My other job is working in retail. That's not here, but that's one of my biggest fears is that a disgruntled customer is going to come into the store where I work and start shooting it up.
Yeah.
I fear that every day, and I shouldn't have to do that because um, we should be able to carry on with our lives and not have to live in fear. But it's getting
Mhm.
to that point, Stephen, and it's just it makes me very very sad that and a very I I saw how you got emotional 2 weeks ago in regards to my family. I get emotional every day thinking about the 19 children who aren't coming home, or the 10 people who aren't going home in Buffalo. The 19 children, I mean, in Uvalde. So I weep for them. I'm lucky that my family got to go home, but all the people who have been victims of shootings, whether it be this year, last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they're still in pain, and that feeling never goes away.
Absolutely. And I hope that the people who watch our show on a regular basis, I hope you can offer prayers and thoughts to Ken and his family, as well as the any other victims of the mass shooting. As Ken mentioned, whether it's yesterday, the week ago, a year ago, or even 10 years ago, any
Mhm.
shooting is a tragic one, and it's about time we have an honest conversation, and then we must forge and forward and think about the people and the children who have to live in fear,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And Nomad says something about children, if children boycott school this year, you know
Mhm.
maybe the children should probably, obviously they're the future, and obviously, you know they are the ones who are going to be leading this country going forward. And these traumatic experiences obviously are going to shape them, fair or unfair. And
Mhm.
hopefully that children are going to help us make amends and rectify the problems that the adults, maybe myself included, that has done wrong in this country.
Absolutely, and let's hope things. I hope, Stephen, maybe next year at this time when we're doing the show, we can be talking about a much safer situation, and we can actually stick to sports. So,
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we don't have to stick to sports if this
no, of
is
course not.
something
But
maybe.
hopefully, we'll be having some happier things to discuss. Of course, we're always going to call out stuff, and the reason why we have this show is to call out hatred against the Asian community and the AAPI community, and that's why we have this show. And we're still going to continue to call it out, and we're going to call out some behavior that we saw earlier this week in the last couple of weeks. And no matter,
Sure.
absolutely, children can change things, and
Hmm.
they are the future of this country, and hopefully they the next generation can do something that the present generations have messed up. And let's hope so, Steve.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about some other things, of course, that has happened over the last couple of weeks since we last had our show. A couple of days ago, over at the Champions League final in Paris, one of the more and really baffling moments. And I was ready to watch and enjoy this, Stephen. I'm sure you were as well.
I
In
was,
the
yes.
Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid, and we were hoping just to see them start at 3 o'clock Eastern time as normal, 2 o'clock Central time here, of course, in Chicago. And then we started getting word on social media that things were being delayed, and UEFA blamed it on late arriving fans in the at the Stade de France in Paris. Instead, we learned in real time as it was happening that 20,000 Liverpool fans were basically heralded into or herded into one area to try to get into one gate. Meanwhile, Real Madrid fans had already been in the stadium for a couple of hours. They had gone through maybe 4 or 5 gates. But in the meantime, Liverpool fans were herded to try to get into one gate. And this
Hmm.
is just ridiculous. And they were pepper sprayed. Now, we
Yes.
all know that English soccer fans haven't had the greatest reputation, but
No.
Liverpool fans going back to Hillsborough have had a lot of pain, and
Right.
they were hoping for an unprecedented triple championship, the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and hoping to get the Champions League this year. But it was not to be, as they lost to Real Madrid 1-0. But that was nearly paled in comparison to what we saw outside the Stade de France in Paris, Stephen.
Yes, absolutely. Rob Harris, AP correspondent, actually shared this a video of him interviewing one of the Liverpool supporters as to what was happening out there.
What's the experience like?
Oh, absolutely horrendous. It's a bottleneck down there. There's literally 6 foot gap for maybe 20,000 Liverpool fans to get in.
Absolutely
We are
shocking.
absolutely being pushed and pillaged. I've got an 82-year-old father-in-law here.
Come on, let's just go, man.
It's just madness. Well, I'm really sorry, but there's thousands behind us.
I've been to Milan, Kiev, I've been everywhere, and I've never known anything as bad as this.
What's your name?
Hills for that.
Yeah, and fans who were just standing at the gate, including a 6-year-old girl, were pepper sprayed for no reason whatsoever, just for standing there. And and it's not like UEFA had a week to move. And originally, if you're not familiar, the Champions League final was supposed to be played in Moscow, but due to what happened, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they moved it to Paris. But this was done two months ago. So the Stade de France had a couple of months to prepare for this, and then all of a sudden, the organization by UEFA and was just horrendous. And Stephen, like I said, English soccer fans haven't had the greatest reputation over the years, but Liverpool fans are basically very, very peaceful. They're very, very aware of what's going on. They know of the reputation. Like I mentioned, Hillsborough is something that happened in the 1980s. And if you're not aware of Hillsborough, I suggest you Google it and also watch the videos. It's very painful to watch. This is why they always sing "You'll Never Walk Alone" before every game. It's just really, really it was just really shameful by UEFA, and I'm just really surprised that they, like I said, it's not like they moved the UEFA Champions League final last week. They moved it 2 months ago, and they should have been prepared for this.
Absolutely, and I will also add about Liverpool and the tragedy, Hazel Stadium disaster, which was a 1985 Champions League final between Liverpool and Italy's Juventus, which also claimed the lives of almost 40 people. So Liverpool, unfortunately, is not a stranger when it comes to a fan disaster. And you mentioned there was only one lane being allowed and several gates being closed up, which obviously makes no sense for UEFA or the France authorities to do something like this. And I was actually baffled why the game wasn't starting at an original time, locally watching it at a bar on CBS here in America. It was just a bad look. I know the French authorities are blaming, English fans, 40,000 of them who showed up with no ticket or even a fake ticket trying to get in and stuff like that. But like you said, Ken, they had 2 months to prepare for this, and this is not the first time they're hosting a major event of this magnitude.
Yep.
And let's not forget, in 2 years, they're hosting the Olympics. The Summer Olympics is in Paris. Okay, that stadium that we saw will likely to be the opening ceremony and then the closing ceremony, as well as other, venue. The venue will be used for the other athletic competitions. So, we all know it's easy to, shit on French people and the French culture for various reasons, and this is not certainly a good look on them.
No, it's not.
And then I just hope that rather than blaming it on English soccer culture, hooliganism, or whatever they want to blame it on, I hope that the thorough investigation is done, and UEFA is on the same level in terms of incompetency and corruption with the IOC, International Olympic Committee, that we have gone after on this show many times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an embarrassment, to be honest.
And there's a very good video if you want to go to YouTube. Sky Sports did an investigation. It's a 12-minute long video of the chronicling of what happened outside the Stade de France. Very good reporting by Sky Sports, and about the whole situation outside and how fans were treated, and video, not only just fan video, but their own video of what was going on outside the Stade de France. So I highly suggest you watch it. Be patient. I know it's 12 minutes. I know our attention spans are short, but I really do suggest you watch it, and you'll see. Even if you think that, and I know a lot of people. When I was tweeting this in real time, someone said to me, I said, I really don't understand why French authorities are tear gassing innocent fans. And you see there's one young girl who is just, she's, I don't think you would call her a hooligan at all, Stephen. And you see her, probably a relative, maybe that's her granddad or her father. This is just ridiculous. Like I mentioned, English soccer fans don't have the greatest reputation, but Liverpool fans are not that type of fans, and they wouldn't dare try to do things like this. And I'm just very angry for the Liverpool fans who weren't able to get into the game, and some of them didn't get until halftime. Some of them just stayed outside, just having to watch the game on their phones, and not being able to see. And you can see one of the Sky Sports reporters going outside. It's just really mind-boggling what happened.
Absolutely, it is mind-boggling, and obviously tear gases and stuff like that aren't normally used here in America unless you're protesting, But it's unfortunately a common theme in Europe, with soccer being a major sport, obviously, and with the relegation and promotions involved, there's a amped up rage by the fans, and it's always been well documented.
Yes.
It's also a class war where laborers were able to watch the game at a more affordably, and was more easier to access than nowadays. Which unfortunately the game has gotten, the tickets, even here in the United States, has gotten so out of control and so out of expenses that it's easy to do. It's no longer something that any average people can go easily. If things here are bad in the United States, obviously things are even more chaotic in UK and other soccer nations. So I understand the frustration, but this is not a good look on the UEFA and Paris authorities, for that matter.
And I'll quickly mention before we can move on to the next topic, and also talk about our guests who we have, which I was remiss in mentioning at the top of the show. The Saint-Étienne was relegated out of League One in France, and there was the French Saint-Étienne fans rioted there as well. So there was tear gas had to be used on the Saint-Étienne fans, as they were relegated pretty much one of the top flight teams in League One. Or Ligue 1, as they say in Paris. But really, it just goes to show that English soccer fans are not immune. It's not just English soccer fans, but also French soccer fans who get a little bit unruly as well. We have another topic to discuss. Let's first also discuss, before we move on to that, Stephen, we have two guests tonight. We should have mentioned them at the top of the show. Who do we have on the show tonight?
Well, we're having both of them speak simultaneously I think this is the first time we've ever done on our show. USA basketball coach Marshall Cho, and actor and producer Brian Yang, talking about the insanity in which Brian was heavily involved in the production. And we're also talking about the impact of insanity that it had on the NBA, as well as on our community. And also we will talk a lot about their careers and the NBA Finals, which is set for June 2nd, the Celtics and the Warriors.
Yes, we'll talk to them coming up shortly. But let's go to our next topic, which is what we've talked about this person quite a bit in regards to her performance. Naomi Osaka lost in the first round of the French Open. she's talked about mental health issues, of course, in regards to her own career. She's had issues with the media. French Open was going to allow her to skip media sessions this season, but of course she lost in the very first match at the French Open last week. And then you can go over this a little bit more because you know a little bit more about this than I do. But apparently Martina Navratilova had some words about Naomi Osaka.
Okay, so the Wimbledon has decided to drop points as a retaliation for Russian and what is the other country that I'm talking about? I forgot the other nation. Maybe can help me out.
Okay, I'll find it.
Obviously, Russian athletes or tennis players as a retaliation for Russia's invasion to Ukraine. And so rather than giving points, they've decided to drop the points for this upcoming tournament. Obviously, tennis is based on the points ranking system. The more you win, obviously, more you advance to the tournament, the more points you accumulate. And obviously, the higher the points, the higher the world rankings. Well, Naomi Osaka said that she doesn't know if she wants to play in the Wimbledon after the points sanction. And she said it's kind of like going to an exhibition. Well, Martina Navratilova, the tennis legend, and obviously someone who has won more than her share of Wimbledon back in the 80s, was not a fan of what she says, and she went to Piers Morgan, who's another controversial talk show host, over there in UK. He used to have a show on CNN in the early 2010s. If you may have heard of his name before, you could Google the interview. Navratilova says that she doesn't understand her mentality. So there were a lot of people who came to Naomi's defense that winning £2 million isn't everything cut out to be for her, and it's not always about the money. It's not about tarnishing your legacy, and then for Navratilova to go after her, and obviously many thought that she was coming after her because of the Naomi being a woman of color, and it's always. With Naomi, we've spoken about her mental, issues and, being open about it. And it's always easy to target her and, her to be taken shot at. And a lot of people this time, she came, Navratilova herself, had to, take a lot of criticism online, which I'm sure Navratilova doesn't really give a what, but it's interesting that every time Naomi says something, that she's always a target of criticism or an attack. And then there was also Karolina Pliskova, who was, I believe, a finalist back in 2012.
Yes.
Also took shots at Naomi Osaka, and this is what she had to tweet. Some people talk about me so much. I'm convinced they're getting paid. No way I'm on your mind that much. Yikes. So it's nice to see Naomi can dish out a comeback of this nature, as because obviously she's dealt so much, and it's easy to take shot at her these days. She left her company that was representing her, I believe IMG International Management Group, and recently started her own representation company. So it's easy for Naomi now to control her own narrative. It's easy, and it'll be interesting to see what Wimbledon does. To me, Wimbledon did it themselves. They're the ones who came up and said, you know what, we're going to not rank any points for anybody as a retaliation to Russian athletes in particular. But even the legends like John McEnroe and among others, they're criticizing the move made by All Wimbledon Club, which manages the Wimbledon tournament. It kind of backfired. So what Naomi's saying is not really wrong. the irony in all of this is that on the men's side, Novak Djokovic, who's obviously been a controversial figure on his own, if he ended up losing, and I believe Dmitry Medvedev, who's a Russian tennis player and top 3 in the world, if he ends up winning the Wimbledon, he's going to be the number 1 guy, which is somewhat of an ironic because, it was supposed to hurt people like Medvedev, but if he ends up winning, he becomes the number 1. Right. So what's the point of, not even, allowing points when you're supposed to hurt the Russian athletes, but instead it might end up benefiting them. And Naomi is the one who has to take a blunt of all of this because it's easy to target her.
Yeah, she's the one who spoke out against it, and then everybody comes after her. The other country, by the way, that you mentioned is Belarus, which has been helping Russia.
Thank you, Belarus.
So Belarus. We checked that out. So that's Belarus. So it'll be interesting to see how Naomi how it continues to affect her and how she continues. But she handled it quite well, and she just shows that she just does a. It's okay. Don't worry about it. So
right.
And she'll be fine. I think she's doing quite well, and we'll continue to root for her on the AA team.
And I'll be interested to see. Whether Wimbledon caves in and decides to bring back the point system like they normally do, and whether if that will sway other people to join the Wimbledon, which will take place in next month. So
all right. So that'll be we'll be looking for that as the summer continues. By the way, we want to mention on this Memorial Day, thank you very much to all the men and women who have served the United States, helped us become the country that we are. Of course, we have our problems as Steve and I talked about at the beginning of the show. But of course, we thank all the men and women who have done the ultimate sacrifice and helped the United States over the years and continue to serve the military. So we thank you very much. And of course, in this unofficial start of the summer, of course, where I am, it's very hot and very humid. So it's very nice to see that the weather is turning. Don't know if it's still hot and humid where you are, Stephen, but certainly hope that we're all staying cool on this Memorial Day. Coming up next, we'll have a segment with Marshall Cho and Brian Yang. We'll talk about Linsanity and the NBA. All that coming up next on the AA team on the Barroom Network.
We have never been a loud people. Our elders always taught us that actions speak louder than words, so we learned to keep our heads down, keep our grades up, keep our kin close, keep our mouths shut. I wonder, what it does to a people when they stay quiet for so long. Do they forget their voice? The sound of their stories, the resilience of language? When you are no longer in your motherland, does your mother tongue still sing of home? What work songs lifted our spirits as we built the railroad? What prayers did we whisper as they sent us to camps in the mountains to meditate on all the ways we don't belong to this country? So we stayed quiet. As they burned our Chinatowns down and spit on our grandmas at bus stops, we stayed quiet. As they laughed in our faces and told us to go back where we came from, but they've mistaken our silence for compliance. Looked on our meekness as weakness. See, we, and not the submissive stereotype that's been depicted on silence, on us, they've gotten it twisted. See, silence is golden, as are we. A gradient of yellow to brown, every Koreatown a little Saigon, an act of defiance. Every hunchbacked elder a humble giant. Silence is grace in the triumph, is peace in the riot. Silence is bold, a force. It is the brewing calm before the coming storm, and now the sky is splitting open and the rage is pouring forth, so this is for every kid who has ever tried to pull their nose bridge to make it taller. Every time they mocked us because our eyes are smaller. This is for our elders, both alive and remembered, for their lessons, the tough and the tender. For our full names, past and present, may they be pronounced, may they be respected. For every chink in the national fabric, every nip in the winter wind of prairie towns and northern hamlets, coast to coast on stolen land. We are here. We've been here. From takeout joints and internment camps to internships and graduation caps, we are strong. We have pride. We fight. We fall. We rise. And to the ones who say we don't belong, it's them who should open their eyes.
Welcome back to the Barroom Network's Double A team. Ken Fang along with Stephen Negishi. Let's introduce our guests.
All righty. I've been working to bring these two gentlemen together. I think it was a fitting to bring both of them as we close out the AAPI Heritage Month, which ends officially tomorrow on the show. We're excited to have USA basketball coach Marshall Cho and actor and producer Brian Yang on our show. Brian, how you doing?
Hey guys, I'm doing great.
How are you?
Can you hear
We're
me
waiting
okay?
for Marshall to join us. Okay. Hi, Marshall. How are you?
Hi guys, how's it going?
Listen, I appreciate both of you for coming on a Memorial Day. Obviously, you guys have been pretty busy as well. So let's start with your introduction. Marshall, can you introduce about yourself? When did you kind of started getting involved in the coaching basketball, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. Looking forward to this conversation and just getting together with my old friend here, Brian Yang. Actually, I started coaching in New York City right around the time I was wrapping up playing in this all-Asian league that Brian was helping to run in New York called Dream League. So that was around 2014-15. I was a middle school charter school math teacher. Was coaching the charter school that I was at in Central Harlem, and just kind of got the bug. Shortly after that, met my wife, who was doing a fellowship in Mozambique, Africa. Followed her out there as a trailing spouse and coached out in Mozambique for 3 years. And after that, came back, coached at a powerhouse program called the Math Catholic. That leads to another opportunity with University of Portland for a couple of years. Circumstances happened where I wanted to kind of prioritize my family, so I left the Division I coaching world and been a high school basketball coach at Lake Oswego High School here in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon for the last 7 years. So,
Nice.
And I'm
Brian, can you introduce you? Sorry about that. My apologies there. Brian, I'm actually in Columbus, Ohio. I'm in the suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I didn't realize you were from Columbus area yourself.
Go Bucks.
Did you go to OSU?
No, I can't claim the OSU as my actual school, but my dad can. So when my dad immigrated from Taiwan to the United States in the late 60s, he went to OSU. In fact, my entire extended family immigrated to the Midwest. So I have 2 uncles and another aunt that went to OSU. So I very much was born into a Buckeye family. But then my father migrated out to the West Coast when I was about 5 years old. So I was born in Columbus, raised in California, but I was brainwashed and bred to be a Buckeye. So even though I went to UC Berkeley later in life, I just always was a Scarlet and Gray guy. And, I tried to root for Cal when I was there. We had some good basketball years around Jason Kidd and stuff. I just aged myself. Yes. But Cal's sports, I'm sorry to say, just couldn't hold a candle to, the football and basketball programs in particular are always in the thick of it, in terms of making March Madness, being in the national championship discussion for football, especially. And so, so even I've been to a couple of Cal OSU matchups, and I'm always rooting for the Buckeyes, and my Cal friends are like, what's wrong with you, man? Huge Buckeye fan through and through.
When did you started acting?
At Cal. So I was, like I mentioned, I grew up in the Bay Area. I stayed there for college. And when I was in college, sophomore year, I kind of fell into an acting class for fun, dramatic arts, to kind of offset my very poor grades in life sciences. I was a bio major. I thought I was going to become a physical therapist, early in my studies, kind of doing the safe, Asian thing, if you will. I didn't want to go to med school and spend 12 years of my life, chasing that. So I found PT, and I thought, maybe I can work with athletes, open up my own clinic, maybe go work for a team. Who knows? That was kind of my idea at the time, but I just sucked at chemistry, physics, and biology. And I wound up, it's kind of a long story how I got involved, but I took a class for fun and I got bit by the bug. And I just wound up taking a class every semester for the rest of my, time in college. And it just kept it kind of like escalated into a thing where even after I graduated, I was like, I kind of want to go into this field, and I don't know about this PT thing. So yeah, so that's how I that's when I started, I guess, officially, if you will.
Marshall, you're as you mentioned, you're a high school coach. So
Yeah.
how's your team doing this so far?
We're doing okay this time of the year. It's across the country. The month of June is where the high school programs kind of get their kids back from their, a lot of the kids who are playing AAU and club basketball. So I'm just gearing up. Depends really on each program how much work they decide to put into it. Some of it, and I guess I would attribute to my immigrant, work ethic type of thing, where I feel like I basically live in the gym, but similar to Brian, while Brian was a failing bio major at Cal, I was a failing accounting major at Oregon, so hearing his story, even though I know it, just from our years of friendship, I think ultimately it's just, being content with just spending time doing what you're passionate about. So, my days consist of ordering, practice jerseys, to signing guys up for summer tournaments, to, open gyms. And, I got this time of the year, I got a lot of alumni back in town. So it's, connecting those guys with the current players and future players and that type of thing. So, yeah, it's busy, but it's fulfilling for sure.
The math is, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. So how did you and Brian get together?
Well, yeah, Brian could tell the story. He was the commissioner of this Asian league, and the thing that he also didn't kind of humble brag about himself is he was quite the journalist, documenting our exploits as predominantly Asian American working professionals. Our peers were the ones who didn't flunk out of finance school or med school. There were guys who were doctors and lawyers and bankers and more along that field. But Brian could talk more about it, but it was a league that we played in, and we would have, he kept stats and wrote articles and stuff. And so that's how we got acquainted with each other.
So Brian, we'll let you go ahead and continue the story.
Yeah. I grew up for the third time. I grew up in the Bay Area in California. We have a very robust circuit, an Asian American basketball circuit that was rooted from the J leagues, the Japanese American leagues that started out of the internment camps, and they carried on, and all the other ethnic enclaves, Chinese, Filipino, Korean, Indo-Pak communities over the years also kind of gave birth to their own leagues and tournaments. And so Dream League, the league that Marshall was referring to, actually, I came to know Marshall before the Dream League, but we met through basketball, and Dream League was obviously a very, special period of our time in which we bonded even more. I became the commissioner of the New York League, the New York chapter, if you will. It was something that my college roommate, who I grew up playing Asian basketball with, started in San Francisco, and I saw a need on the East Coast, where I was living, thinking maybe we could do this as a sort of a weekend warrior, activity. And it grew actually very quickly into four nights or, weekend afternoons a week. And it became almost like a side, something I asked for, because I actually was holding down a 9-to-5 job at the time. Mm-hmm. And, but it quickly grew because as Marshall said, we offered something that was a little more unique than the average rec league. We kept statistics. We wrote very detailed articles. We almost treated, the dream and Dream League sort of refers to like you're living the dream, you weekend warrior, and we're putting your names in lights. We're literally like keeping tabs, not just of made field goals, but turnovers, assists, season cumulative totals, your career totals, if you will, and all-star games, occasional videos. That was a little early on in the digital age, and we didn't really have a robust video team, but we took photos and had a lot of fun with it. And people just, when they heard about it, they all wanted to come in and play. I had people from not even, in our city asking, can you start one in Detroit? Like, my friend told me about your league. It sounds amazing. So we had a lot of fun with it. But something I would be remiss to point out, if I didn't say, is the fact that Marshall Cho here, you're talking to one of the Hall of Fame players from the Dream League, really any league that he has run in over the years. This guy has set the scoring record on numerous occasions, like for single game season average. This guy could shoot lights out. I mean, there's a reason he's a basketball coach, but as a player, this guy was no joke himself. And so, we're among greatness here, I must point out. So, but Asian American basketball, it's something that's still very prominent in my life. I have kids now that I'm thinking about, introducing them into. I actually just got done with playing in something called the Tigers Tournament this week. It's a Memorial Day weekend tournament that's been going on. The Los Angeles Tigers, which are one of the Japanese American club teams, has been throwing this tournament for decades. And I'm part of the Masters division now, which basically means people, over a certain age. And we won the championship this weekend, which
congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. I hadn't had that feeling in a few years because I hadn't really been hooping. I don't know about you, Marshall, but because of the pandemic and everything, like all the rec leagues and pickup has kind of dried up. But I'm starting to get back into it a little bit, even at this old age. So yeah. So that was that's kind of how we really started to get closer, Marshall and I. And I'm sure we can talk more about it as this hour goes on. But I really always respected what this guy was all about. Obviously from the way he could play basketball, but then off the court, even more impressive with his approach to life, his dedication to education and coaching and beyond. So when I heard that you were going to invite him on to the show as well, I was like, oh, this is like a no brainer. Like, cause we rap a lot. I just, Marshall comes to California occasionally to coach clinics and stuff. And it's always a blast to catch up with him. So thanks for organizing this.
No, we're welcome. We thank you for coming.
So, Brian, keeping stats, did you also decide to go into the analytics area for the league as well?
We weren't that advanced. I think if we had continued to run the league, maybe that would have been, we ran the league for a good 10 years or so. And then I had left, unfortunately. The league in the Bay Area still exists, but we had to kind of retire it out on the East Coast. So if someone wanted to pick up the torch again, I'm sure we would look at that, adding the analytics aspect.
Mm-hmm. We have Brian Yang and Marshall Cho, two old friends, joining us on the AA team tonight on our show. Marshall, I want to touch on your coaching career. You said you began at the DeMatha Catholic High School. For those of you who are not familiar with DeMatha Catholic, it is a powerhouse outside of Washington, D.C. And if you Google DeMatha Catholic and their list of alumni in the athletic area, especially basketball, it is just impressive. You have Hall of Famer Adrian Dantley, Mike Bray, who is coaching the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Sidney Lowe. For the newer fans, let's see, Dre Grant, Victor Oladipo, who unfortunately lost yesterday in Game 7. I'm sorry.
I'm not too sorry about that.
Yeah, because you're in the
I'm in the
Boston
New England area. Yeah.
Well, Victor Oladipo, as well as Markelle Fultz, Chase Young, who was a Ohio State football player who went number 2 overall in the 2019 NFL draft with the now Washington Commanders, just to name a few. Marshall, what was it like to coach in a high school that is as prestigious as DeMatha, and how did it shape you, to where you are in terms of your coaching career right now?
Yeah, I get that question often, and what's neat about just being in this space with other Asian Americans and just given the month that we're celebrating, I think something that Brian mentioned earlier really resonated with me when he was talking about starting a league, because he saw the need for it. He didn't see the market for it, or he didn't see something to be gained. He saw that there was a need for that community to be there. So when I was playing in New York, it's kind of finding your sense of belonging and identity, and people that look like you who actually do play basketball. And for me, again, having not followed the traditional path and not studied as hard as maybe I should have, and gotten into the schools, maybe, other, second, first generation, Asian American immigrants, across the board would want their child to pursue. But what I found in that league was a sense of belonging, right? it's the same thing when I started coaching. My start even before DeMatha was in Mozambique in the middle of nowhere with predominantly Africans in Mozambique, and in New York it was in Harlem, in Central Harlem, at a predominantly African American community. Even though I'm again a Korean American immigrant, and so I found a sense of belonging in terms of like, okay, I belong to a part of the coaching community. What DeMatha allowed me was a sense of belonging at a higher level, that that being around and rubbing shoulders with all the people, famous alumni who would come in, or just the players who were produced in that short 3-year window that I was in. By the time I left it, I realized that, okay, I have a foundation. There isn't a court, like what Brian said. I had enough confidence in my game that whether it was a pickup ball that I would, go and play in Harlem at the famed, Rucker Park or anywhere else, or when I was in the middle of nowhere in South Africa, and I could hop onto a court and I could leave an impression, and it's usually people being surprised, right, that an Asian American could play. Similar to, I know we're going to touch on it with the Linsanity journey, but it's surprising. It's changing people's perception of you. Well, DeMatha was really the first time when I was around it every day. I saw that, it's coaching. It's just, there's nothing complicated about it. What the people there with the tradition that came many years before, when Morgan Wooten, that set, and then it continued on with the coach that was there, Mike Jones, that I worked for, is that sense of confidence that we are the top, program in the country. And to live it, breathe it, and serve in it every day, by the time I left, I said to myself, I can coach anywhere. And so it gave me that confidence to kind of project myself onto that next level in the Division I world. And anytime I look back, and I step into a space like USA Basketball, I have a deep-rooted confidence that comes from knowing that I put in my time, at one of the top programs in the country.
One of the things I wanted to ask both of you, obviously, the May being Asian American Heritage Month, Marshall, from somebody who played basketball and coaching now, and Brian, as an established actor living in New York right now, what has this pandemic and the rise in the AAPI racism impacted you from a social aspect? And Marshall, you obviously coach basketball, which there's a lot of African American players that you have probably dealt with, many of them in the past. Did you sense any disconnect? I don't want to say disrespect, but like being coached by an Asian Americans, or maybe opposing coaches, opposing fans, saying some racial stuff at you while you were coaching?
I think I've been fortunate not to experience something blatant to my face. There's been many episodes of microaggression, and some of it having to do with the fact that not just the way I look, but I'm short, and I look younger than I am, so I think those are things just you just learn to deal with and cope with, I guess. And I'm not saying that if something happened where I felt like that line was crossed in terms of disrespecting my race or my background or whatnot, that I wouldn't speak up for myself. But I think also a lot of it is just, at least for the players that I had, we talk about, Asian American, African American solidarity. Like for me, the time that I spent in the South Bronx and teaching in Harlem, what it really taught me was the social injustices that a lot of my students had to go through, the systematic racism that exists in this country that keeps people, from being able to reach their full potential. So for me, coming into that space is always, with humility and with, trying to understand where, my players were coming from. And I think that comes across. I think just that background, if anything, from any competition that I might have, is as somebody who lives in the black and white world, having grown up in Springfield, in a predominantly white state, city in Springfield, Oregon. So I think what it's taught me is it's taught me to navigate, both spaces and to take pride in who I am, and that a lot of my coaches would say, hey, like, when I was at University of Portland, I said, how am I going to be a recruiter? and one of my mentor, friends who was on the staff at University of Portland told me it's okay to be different, but if you're going to be different, you have to be good. And so I think that's been my focus, is to really, work my craft so that there aren't any holes in my game in terms of coaching, that I can do it all. I can cut video. I can do all the operations aspects of running a program, and I can be on the court and run a drill for the guards, the wings, the post. It was really about not having any holes in my craft so that people couldn't keep me back from what I'm supposed to achieve. If that makes sense.
Yes. Brian, as an actor, you living in New York also, Marshall just mentioned about his experience teaching in the Bronx and Brooklyn and those areas. Obviously, the representation matters, especially, we've been voicing a lot in the entertainment world, even with the emergence of, a lot of actors and, popularity of K-pop. But from your perspective, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and a lot needs to be done. And then maybe both of you can obviously draw from your experience, Brian living in New York, Marshall having lived in New York. There has been a lot of Asian Americans who have been attacked and assaulted a lot in New York, and you hear that story a lot nowadays ever since this pandemic has happened. Do you see any disconnect with the between Asian Americans and African Americans and even Hispanic Americans? Where do you see this discord coming from, and what can be done to kind of, I don't know, elevate or close that gap?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you. I'm actually no longer in New York. I live in LA, but I lived there for 12 years. But I go back frequently. But to your point about the seemingly, undoubtedly rise in sort of Asian hate and attacks that have been particularly, prominent in major metropolitan cities like New York, where a lot of my friends still live. I think that, yes, there's been something like a 3,000% rise in these acts of hate in the last few years, given the circumstances around the pandemic, the political rhetoric that's coming out of certain, corners, and just the lack of understanding, that has been rooted in this country because of the erasure or, invisibility of our community, in particular in media, right? And when I say media, I use, it's not just Hollywood or entertainment. It's the sports field. It's, even when it comes to, business, right? And people because today, like, business figures can be celebrities and cultural icons as well. So if you're in the spotlight, you're covered by the media through Business Week or, whatever, Silicon Valley, platforms that are out there, all of that adds up. And so I think that, unfortunately, while these acts of hate have risen, I do think that a lot of it is, it's very serious and severe. And I think there is a root cause that needs to be addressed. I do think that, I'm an eternal optimist, maybe good or bad. I feel like the things that get the headlines are obviously the acts of hate and the disgusting, bludgeoning of senior citizens and things like that. I think there are a lot more people that are actually interested in allyship and trying to build bridges than we realize. I've been spending a good deal of the last couple of years working on initiatives. I did a lot of work with a former presidential candidate by the name of Andrew Yang. Some of you may have heard of him. Kind of another New York story where I met Andrew actually first. I actually moved there to go work for his company in the late 90s, to give some context. So I've known him a long, long time. When he decided to run for president, he called all his friends and I volunteered to basically help him out, and I joined his campaign. And in 2020, we, after he had kind of stepped out of the race, we started to work on this issue, in light of a lot of the attacks that were happening at that time. and we ran fundraisers. We held discussions online. We had PSAs, things of that nature. And we reached out to community leaders in other communities, and a lot of people, like I said, are trying to understand the problem. And again, things that are sort of second nature to us in terms of like Asian American history. Like when I went to UC Berkeley, I that's where I really started to learn more about my own community through Asian American Studies 101, through Ronald Takaki's Strangers from a Different Shore, which is kind of like the Bible for Asian American, history and studies, and how we laid the tracks in the railroad, and how we contributed to this country for since the founding of it, really. But a lot of that, again, was just never highlighted. So I think that, there's definitely, and this is a very, you can hold a whole other, podcast about this problem of, mental health and a lot of the challenges that we're facing collectively in this country, and how polarized we've become as a nation, politically, culturally, in some areas. But I think that we're, all we can do is continue to put our best foot forward and show up. Every game that Marshall shows up to coach, every clinic he shows up to conduct, every kid that doesn't have the same background as him, that he shows up and mentors, that matters. And those are the stepping stones and building blocks that's going to continue to like bring our community, up, and sort of continue to, even though we feel like we know we deserve a seat at the table, that gap that is happening between us and a lot of people outside the community is just because of the fact that the numbers haven't been there. We haven't been given the opportunity to be in the positions of, athletic directors, coaches, executives in Hollywood or in the boardroom. And so all of these things we're chipping away at finally, or we've been, but I feel like there's been tremendous strides in the last number of years. And so, Marshall and I are both fathers, and my hope is that, when all is said and done, we've done our part and left our world, a little bit better place than we found it. Right. So that's kind of my take on the current climate and, where we're headed and what we're trying to do.
Well, I'll mention, full disclosure, when I lived in Dallas not too long ago, I was actually involved in the Andrew Yang's campaign. I was kind of somewhat of a volunteer, maybe not as heavily involved, not like a volunteer coordinator or any of that stuff, but I was involved. And I met Andrew himself in Dallas, probably toward the end of his campaign, when he eventually dropped out, like you said, Brian. I did meet him. I had a copy of his book signed, and I was really hoping that he would go a little more further than the so-called traditional candidates. So, but obviously he's forming a new party and et cetera, et cetera. So as an Asian American, it would be nice to see more people like him get the attention and the respect that he deserves. And also in my last show, we had Pranav Iyer, who's also Indian American gentleman, who is the owner of Amazing HQ, which is a sports website that highlights Asian Americans, East Americans like Indians and among others. So, if you're the one who actually introduced me to Pranav, and I want to thank you personally for recommending him. And we were able to, interview him and highlight his amazing work in addition to working with the ESPN in Los Angeles as a, social media specialist. So, Brian, I want to thank you for.
You don't need to thank me. Pranav I've met him. I met him a number of years ago. He's a great, I call him a kid. He's a great kid. And again, an example of, folks like Marshall and others, I guess I'm in that bunch, like us Gen Xers who have kind of like been at this for a long time. Pranav is the next generation, and he's really taken that torch and he's, kicking that door open wider, right? I was at his all-star game last weekend here in LA. I was blown away. I brought my 4-year-old girl to it. They had a girls game and a boys game. And it was just like the level of talent and just, it's underappreciated how someone like him will provide a platform like that for for people to discover each other, or for, the public to see through social media. And so it's just encouraging to see, again, at this time, like, we're making tremendous strides through him. And he's actually a fellow, I think he went to the same high school as me, but many, many, many years later. And I discovered it, or we met because he interviewed me for something that he was working on about the Asian American basketball leagues that I talked about at the top. He did a whole like deep dive about the history of it, how it started, all the different communities that have their own, tournaments and everything. And so, I love him. I love Pranav and what he's doing, and eager to see what he's going to do going forward.
We're speaking with Brian Yang, one of the an actor and also producer, and Marshall Cho, high school basketball coach in Lake Oswego out in Oregon. We thank them for joining us here on the Double A team here on the Barroom Network. In the time we have left, Brian, let's talk about a project you're working on, and something that's close to my heart. As Stephen introduced me to this project that you're working on about Jeremy Lin and Linsanity. Let's talk a little bit about the impact he had on the NBA. It's hard to believe it's almost like the last decade. It seemed like 5 years ago or 3 years ago when he made his impact on the NBA. And it really made an impact, especially in New York and all over, especially in Taiwan and in China, where the NBA was really, really taking off. Let's talk a little bit about his impact and what you've been doing on this project.
Well, yeah, the documentary we made was almost 10 years ago. Linsanity, the phenomenon, as it were, broke out 10 years ago. So there's been a lot of decade celebrations around it in the last couple months, because it started in early February and kind of lasted into late March. So I've been involved with a couple of those panels and different things that were happening around the celebration. What can I say? It was, again, going back to the Dream League, Marshall and I, where we got to know each other much better. That league, because of my very amateur sort of aspirations around being this, like, there's weekend warrior on the court. I was weekend warrior on the keyboard with my so-called journalism. So I used the Dream League platform as almost like a press platform where I was able to say, I'm so-and-so from Dream League, and we write articles and have, columns about related Asian American related basketball related topics. And so when Jeremy was at Harvard, actually, as a junior, I think, or senior, I can't remember now, I called the athletic office and I said, I'm Brian Yang from Dream League. And I'm sure the person on the other end of the line was like, I don't know what that is, but no one ever calls Harvard Sports for interviews. So so Jeremy called me back within a day or two, I remember, and I did an hour-long phone call interview with him, transcribed it, and stuck it on the Dream League homepage. And when Harvard was coming to play Columbia, I wrote, on the webpage, if anyone wants to come with a group of us to go watch Jeremy Lin, NorCal Boys Basketball Player of the Year, play Columbia Lions, come out this Saturday. And I think about 4 people showed up. And maybe there were more that tried to get there, because I don't know about you, Marshall. None of us had ever been to the Columbia basketball gym before trying to go see Harvard play Columbia. So no one, we're like, where is this gym? And you walk in and it's basically a high school gym, right? It's like, it's Ivy League basketball. Some of the Ivy League gyms, I got to say, because I wound up going to see Jeremy play against Yale, Penn, Princeton, but Columbia's was definitely one that was lacking. And so that's how I got to know him a little bit, because through that interview and going to see him play in that game. And then by the time when he started his senior year and he was on the long shot list of making the NBA, my filmmaking partners and I decided to pursue the documentary. And we asked him if he was into it. And at first he was very like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, he didn't really understand what a documentary was and the process and all that. And he's like, why would you want to follow me? Like, I don't even know if I'm going to, like, there's no sure thing that I'm going to make the NBA. Like, wouldn't that be a waste of your time? And we thought, well, leave that to us. Like, if you don't make the NBA, it's fine. We're willing to take that risk. And so At worst, it'll just be some like home video, right? Footage that you can watch when you grow old or what have you. And so he kind of just kept punting when we asked him throughout his Harvard senior year. We checked in a few times, and it wasn't until he was with the Golden State Warriors in his rookie year, he came back to us and said, if you guys still want to do this, I'm much more open to it now. And I believe it was, the fact you become a pro, the game changes, right? He's like, well, I'm in the NBA now, and my agents and, this is my career, this is my profession. I have to like try to figure out how to sign endorsements and I'm the brand now. And so maybe I guess a documentary around me makes a little more sense. So he let us have access, and then that's how we officially got started, because we had sort of started unofficially even before he became a Warrior. We felt like there was some things to record when he was still at Harvard, which wound up making the documentary, bits and pieces of it, because it was happening and we couldn't, let those opportunities slide, So that was that was when we got going, and this was 2011. And of course, looking back, like once February 2012 rolled around and everything started happening, we were as how do I put it? I mean, Jeremy obviously had his own roller coaster ride, and we had a kind of a front row seat to it. So we definitely had our insane moments ourselves when people we had talked to about this idea were kind of laughing at us at first, and then coming back to us and going, "Are you guys still shooting with Jeremy?" Like, and I'm talking about like major media companies, producers and executives in Hollywood that were friends of ours who had sort of a passing interest in his story because they were like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But then when things got real, they were suddenly, everyone came circling back. And so I always say I could probably write a book about the making of the movie. But at the end of the day, we were just fortunate to be along for the ride. And then, we wrapped up the movie, took it to Sundance 2013, and, had a fair amount of success with it. Like as you mentioned, in China and Taiwan. And then, obviously it was on Netflix for a while. It's on Amazon today. And we just celebrated the 10-year, anniversary of it, which was remarkable. You blink and here we are. And so I always look back on that period and the experience that I got with a great deal of fondness, just being right place, right time, and watching this kid, Jeremy, like write history in front of us. And I'm sure Marshall has his own story around it, or like, in terms of, how it's affected you and all that. But I think it's safe to say all of us were watching that stretch, like as must-see TV, right? I know I was.
We'll all remember where we were when he just went crazy on when he was with the Knicks and went crazy against the Lakers at Madison Square Garden, and the fans were chanting his name. I think we all remember where we were when that game played a part. Marshall, talk about Jeremy's impact on basketball and in the decade since he rose on the scene.
Yeah, I mean, beyond just being something that's inspiring, it as a coach, I think about, what's the next step? So what's the next decade look like? What comes after the inspiration? Obviously for me personally, he moved the needle. When I used to play, it used to be, hey, I was called Bruce Lee, right, on the basketball floor. He's the singular Asian American that everybody knew. And then it's Jackie Chan, who's not Asian American, but he's a Asian. Sure. And so the progress goes from that to being called Yao Ming, when Yao Ming is 7'6" and I'm 5'8", And so there's a part of you that's like, oh, that's progress. And then when Jeremy finally came, and again, what a lot of people, the way Steph Curry has changed the game because he's so relatable. I mean, Jeremy, beyond that moment of inspiration, it was somebody who was actually a basketball player, who actually grew up here, who spoke fluently, was overlooked and all of that. I think, like Brian touched on earlier, I think our sense of urgency as parents, now, the work that we do is like, how do we speed this up so that it's more acceptable, that in my circle, I knew a lot of NBA scouts, right? And I would ask them as Jeremy was coming out, hey, what do you think about this kid from Harvard? And across the board, he was overlooked. Nice kid, he'll make money overseas, but not a single scout that I had spoken to gave him a shot. So for him to kick that door open, it was that first step. For me, just reflecting on my journey and having been a teacher and now a coach, essentially an educator, I think to myself, well, then that next Jeremy Lin that, I think those early years, I think a lot of us were saying, well, this is going to propel to many more Jeremy Lins coming up. And we really haven't seen, that kind of player produced again. And I think my challenge is now that I've, arrived at a certain point professionally, what would the next few years look like if I really turned around and help to raise the level of coaching that's available to Asian Americans across the board, that the kids that are inspired by it, the parents like of our generation who now have 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and 12-year-olds who want to play, what is the pathway? Because I think as you get into deeper generation, obviously I'm speaking to a room of Taiwanese Americans and even the Brian touching on the J League, that's multiple generations, right, that have passed. Well, for me as a Korean American, we're really stepping into the second generation phase where a lot of us were given the freedom to pursue our passions, and we want to turn around and do the same for our children. So I feel like there's a tremendous opportunity for the next generation of Asian Americans who are coming up. If they want to pursue basketball, then it's up unto us as a storyteller like Brian who could tell that story and keep that on the forefront. And then there's the technicians like myself who are coaches who've gained all this knowledge. Okay, now how do I give it back to coaches and players so that we do have, multiple, Division I basketball players who may again have a chance to, break it, so that there isn't again just that singular figure and we have to settle for Jeremy. That next time it's not, next time an Asian American steps onto a court, they're being called by their name, not by, the stereotype of who we are. Exactly. And I think you talk about the Asian hate piece. You can't hate, you can't commit a crime against Brian Yang or Marshall Cho if you know them personally. I think a lot of that attack comes to us because we are invisible, because we are part of the monolith that people, try to put us into, the same pot. So I think that's where the challenge is, and that's where the real hard work is, about to begin.
Absolutely. We have an NBA draft coming up very soon next month. And, the names like Hyunjin Lee from the Davidson program, which is obviously the famous alumni, is Steph Curry. He's in the NBA draft workout right now. And there's also a player by the name of Kai Soto, who's a Filipino American who I believe one time committed to Kentucky, but eventually went overseas and played. And now he's actually being mentioned as a legitimate second round, pick in this upcoming draft. And we already have Rui Hachimura, who's obviously of Japanese national, born by a Senegalese mother, I believe. And this is going to be very interesting. The interest in the NBA in the Asian countries has always been strong. I believe Warriors and Hachimura's the Wizards. I forgot what they're called now, but they're playing in Tokyo later this year to open the season. And the impact of and the infusion of AA players in the in the NBA cannot be underestimated. And before we close out, I wanted to ask you guys the NBA Finals. We know the team Celtics, Warriors. Who do you like? Which team in what game? How do you see this playoff playing out?
Well, I already know what Brian's going to answer. I'm already going to say homer for
okay,
Warriors.
Brian, you taking the Warriors?
But hey, Steven, can I interrupt real quick just so that
Sure.
we get this in? I think Hyunjin Lee is an interesting case. I just talked about the infrastructure that's there to support players that are coming up. He's a product of the NBA Academy.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So before he came to play at Davidson, he was a player. He was a player in in Korea, but he was selected to be part of the NBA Academy, so that he received the kind of training that gave him an opportunity to have success and have the foundation to succeed in the Division I world. And again, to kind of relive this Jeremy Lin, narrative. Like a lot of the scouts that I talk to these days, they typecast him. Oh, he's a really good shooter. Well, what else can he do, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about the lack of progress. I think Hyunjung to Jeremy is a great gap to study everything in between.
Sure.
But if you study the case for him, you see that he had received a structure to position himself to be potentially drafted. So the question again comes back to, what my agenda of talking about training the next one, so that hopefully they're playing for the Warriors or the Celtics or, my Blazers, and we can talk about them next year.
Absolutely. You're not going to find too many Yao Mings out there nowadays, unfortunately. But hopefully, even somebody, you don't have to be like a 7-footer, like I said about Yao Ming, to make it to the league. If Jeremy Lin can obviously make it to the league, even on a, short-term basis, there's always going to be a role for somebody like Hyunjin Lee who can definitely shoot lights out. And he's already proven that at Davidson. So hopefully he'll have his shot in the NBA. Okay, let's go back to the finals question to close out the show. Brian, who are you picking?
Oh, well, Marshall says he thinks he knows who I'm going to say. Because I'm from the Bay Area, so the obvious answer would be, Steph and the Splash Brothers and company. But I didn't grow up a Warrior fan, believe it or not. I do appreciate Run TMC and the history the Warriors have had and the run. But when I was a kid, I latched on to the Sixers, the Philadelphia 76ers of all teams. I was a huge Dr. J to Charles Barkley to AI fan. So I'm not a homer. I'm not going to just say the Warriors because I'm from the Bay. I never actually loved them. And when they won, it was cool. When they lost, I didn't take it personally or, want to throw my television out of the, off the balcony or anything like a true sports fan. So that being said, obviously the Warriors are the favorites here. So I would have to go with the percentages. I will say that I'm a huge Jaylen Brown fan because he even though I'm a Buckeye, I do.
Yeah, he went to Cal, I believe.
He is the one Cal guy that I really appreciate. I think he's both on and off the court. He's just seems like a great guy. I mean, he's, if you guys know his off court, his demeanor, his interests and everything, he's just a well-rounded person. And Tatum's obviously the guy there, but I think Brown is the X factor. And so I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I think it's going to be, I see a 6-game series. I'm even rooting for a 7-game series because I always love, I love a good 7-game series. So I don't want the Warriors to steamroll them. I just want to see a good series. And so
sure.
I am going with Golden State based on the fact that I think that the experience and the firepower are just a little too much. But if Boston wins, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to you won't hear me complaining. So.
Marshall, what about your perspective as a coach?
Yeah, I was just trying to distract people from the fact that I'm going to make a biased vote. So I just early trying to pin that pick on Brian. But the Boston Celtics actually have a very strong contingent of Portland, Oregon representation. So Ime Udoka, who's the head coach, played at Portland State, played at Jefferson High School, which is a powerhouse program here. He's got a couple of assistant coaches. Damon Stoudemire, who played in the league, he went to Wilson High School locally here before going to Arizona. Aaron Miles, who played at Kansas, also played at Jefferson. And we have an alum, Ben Sullivan, who was on the Milwaukee Bucks coaching staff, who has moved on. So he's from Lake Oswego High School, played here actually where I coach. So he's on the bench as well. And there's a few others. So we've been in our neck of the woods. We've been calling them the Portland Celtics because our own team isn't. We've been lottery bound this year. So I'm hoping for an interesting series where the Celtics could take it. Steal one away, similar to how the Raptors did it when no one was expecting to do it. But yeah, it's a daunting task up ahead of them for sure.
Very true, and you're speaking my language here, Marshall. So
yeah. Good luck with that.
As I mentioned, I'm just going to hope for a very good series like Brian is, and if they can extend it to 6 or 7, I'll be very happy at this point. There, I know the odds are stacked against the Celtics, but we'll take what we can at this point.
There's a reason why you play the game.
Exactly.
If we learned anything from our conversation, don't count out the underdogs, right? So,
absolutely. Well, Brian, Marshall, we thank you very much for joining our show. We thank you very much for talking about representation because, as we always say, it does matter. And thank you very much for taking the time for coming on the show and talking basketball, which is one of my favorite sports, and talking about an era of insanity, which was a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
We hope to have you again, guys. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
And the Double A team on the Barroom Network will continue after this short break.
Come on, man. We're going to Baltimore. The Wire is the best show of all time. And I've never seen such riveting TV where I actually felt like I was in East and West Baltimore every single episode. And it was just absolutely riveting and captivating from season 1 all the way to season, to it finished up.
And I'd put True Detective up there. McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. I mean, come on. It was just so well shot, so well written, directed. Like, I feel like it's underrated as far as that list goes. Really good.
Van, do you prefer the method of having altering?
No, because Mark Trestman did that and Matt Nagy did that, and arguably they're the worst 2 coaches in the history of the franchise.
You're forgetting John Fox. He squeezes in there, baby.
Did Fox do that too?
I think so.
Fuck that. Put the C on Fields and leave it there.
Exactly.
Zim, Joe, Vinny, and Gonzo. Join these White Sox fanatics every Monday night for the South Burbs Hitmen. You're going to be treated to great guests, top analysis, smart debates. South Burbs Hitmen with Zim, Joe, Benny, and Gonzo, only on the Barroom Network.
And South Burbs Hitman is coming on next here on the Double A after us here on the Double A team here on the Barroom Network. Stephen, another great night of guests. We thank Marshall Cho, and we also thank Brian Yang for coming on. Very much appreciated talking about why representation matters and why it's so important to show people that Asians can play basketball, Asians can coach basketball, Asians do love basketball, and it just goes to show that, as I said, representation matters.
It really does, and having Brian and Marshall, who are both involved in the the basketball world, as a coach and as a producer of Brian being the producer of Linsanity, really was an incredible honor to have them and offer their great insight. Was a tremendous opportunity for us to be re-educated and to be re-educated on the impacts of Jeremy Lin. And, hopefully we'll have Jeremy Lin in the future, whether it's directly through him or maybe through Brian. But, whatever Jeremy is doing, he certainly has done so much to our community. And we hope that Jeremy will continue to make impacts for our community on and off as well.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, which will be in just a few minutes, Stephen, we may have one more subject that we want to discuss.
Yeah, this is somewhat of more of a Chicago, more local aspect of it that I told Aldo this afternoon. There's this goalkeeper who plays for the Chicago Fire for the MLS. His name is Gabe Slonina, who's actually a Polish American. He is from Addison in the Chicago suburbs. He was actually heavily courted by Polish Soccer Federation and national team. But recently, he has chosen to represent the United States. He's only 18 years old, And he's a very, very young and talented player. The Fire, unfortunately, has been somewhat struggling in recent weeks. Of course, it's not all on Gabriel Slonina. He goes by Gaga as well, as in Lady Gaga. But he is actually, one of the top prospects that are being courted by, Real Madrid, who won the Champions League on Saturday. Chelsea, your favorite team, Ken.
Yeah.
And there are several other teams who are actually wanting to bring him over this summer. The soccer in Europe is, obviously in the off-season stage where teams are, starting to plan for a transfer period right now. And, Gabe is only 18 years old, so he's not going to be, manning Real Madrid's goalkeeping all of a sudden now. But come 2026, when the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are all hosting the World Cup, remember Gabe Slonina. He could be the number one goalkeeper if he continues to develop, as many European teams thinks highly of him. And I can only imagine as an 18-year-old kid having to choose which country he has to represent. Poland, they're playing in the World Cup. They have an outstanding striker in Kevin Lewandowski, who is probably wanting to leave Bayern Munich and go to Barcelona and any other clubs that he wants to. But there's a strong Polish contingent, community in Chicago area. So obviously, for him to choose to represent United States, it's a huge decision. I can only imagine if somebody with dual citizenship, whether it's Mexican and American or maybe other Latin countries and the U.S., the pressure of having to represent or choose one country to represent is daunting. But as somebody from Chicago, hopefully this is somebody that you guys can all remember, going forward.
Absolutely. And so we look forward to seeing Gaga down the line playing, whether it maybe for the whether it be for the United States and also Real Madrid and maybe Chelsea. We'll see that. We'll see
yes,
that really soon. So that's going to wrap up our show. We have, once again, South Burbs Hitmen coming up next here on the Barroom Network. We thank our guests, Marshall Cho and Brian Yang, for coming on. Stephen, another great night of guests, and thank you very much for getting them for us. And we will be back again in a couple of weeks in June.
Yes.
Hopefully, it won't be too hot as the humidity continues to pour on here where we are. But thank you once again for Stephen Negishi. I'm Ken Fang. This has been the AA team on the Barroom Network, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Good night, everybody.